He stood on the edge, the wind howling beneath the bridge. His empire was gone, his family too, and for the first time the billionaire had nothing left to lose. But just as he was about to let go, a poor girl's trembling voice behind him whispered 7 words that changed everything. The city was asleep beneath a blanket of fog when Alexander Reed parked his black car near the old bridge. It was the same bridge where he once stood in victory, the night his company first went public. But tonight he stood there again alone, broken. The world knew him as the billionaire of steel, the man who could buy entire cities with a single signature. But no one knew the man who sat awake every night staring at the ceiling, haunted by the silence of an empty mansion. He had built skyscrapers, bought islands, and turned dust into gold. Yet somehow he had lost the one thing that truly mattered: peace. His wife Claire had died in a car crash a year ago. His son hadn't spoken to him in months, and last week the board of his company had betrayed him, taking away the empire he spent 30 years building. Everything he thought was permanent had vanished in days, and so he came to the bridge, not for the view, but for the end. He stood on the railing, his coat flapping in the cold wind, eyes fixed on the dark water below. The city lights blurred into nothingness. He whispered quietly, "Maybe it's time to rest, Claire." But then, a voice behind him, small, uncertain, trembling, broke through the wind. "Sir, please don't," he froze. The voice didn't sound like someone important. It was soft, innocent, and scared. He turned slightly and saw her. A girl, maybe 18 or 19, standing in an oversized sweater, her shoes torn, her hair messy from the wind. Her eyes held something he hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not fear, but understanding. "What do you know about this?" he said coldly. "You wouldn't understand." The girl took a hesitant step closer. "I may not understand your pain," she said softly, "but I know what it's like to lose hope." He frowned. "Hope?" She nodded, her eyes glistening. "When my mom got sick, I sold everything to buy her medicine. We lived on the streets for months. People passed us every day and nobody looked twice. I thought the world had forgotten us. But one day a stranger gave me half his sandwich and said, 'Don't give up. The world still has small miracles.'" She looked straight at him now. "Sir, maybe you just forgot what your miracle looks like." Alexander looked away. His jaw tightened. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to tell her that miracles were for the naive. But something in her voice, something unpolished yet painfully real, made him pause. The girl continued, "You don't have to jump. You don't have to end it. You just have to start again, differently." He let out a bitter laugh. "Start again? Do you know who I am? I've built empires, lost billions, lost everything. Starting again isn't an option." She smiled sadly. "Then start small. Start with helping someone else." Her words echoed against the steel of the bridge. "Start with helping someone else." He turned back toward the water, his hands shaking slightly. He saw his reflection, tired, old, broken, and for the first time, he didn't see a billionaire. He saw a man who had been running for far too long. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Lila," she said, "Lila Carter." "And where do you live, Lila Carter?" She hesitated, glancing away. "Nowhere. I sleep under the bridge sometimes." He blinked, speechless. She had nothing. Not money, not home, not comfort. Yet she stood there, saving a man who had everything. Something in his heart cracked open. He climbed down from the railing and stood beside her. The cold wind brushed against his face, and for the first time in months, he felt the weight of his choices. Lila looked at him with quiet relief. "You did the right thing." He managed a faint smile. "I'm not sure about that yet." She shrugged. "You will be." For a long moment, they just stood there in silence. A billionaire and a homeless girl, bound by pain neither could fully explain. Finally, he said softly, "Lila, are you hungry?" Her eyes widened slightly, as if the question was a luxury she hadn't heard in a while. "Always," she said with a small laugh. He nodded, opening his car door. "Come on. Let's go get something to eat." Lila hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," he interrupted gently, "but maybe I should." As they drove away, The fog slowly lifted from the bridge behind them, and though Alexander didn't realize it yet, that small act of kindness in that one moment was the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. Because sometimes all it takes to rebuild a shattered soul is one stranger who dares to care. The city lights blurred past as Alexander drove in silence. Lila sat quietly beside him, shivering slightly, her hands tucked into her sleeves. She wasn't used to warmth or kindness or being seen. He glanced at her and noticed how fragile she looked, yet her eyes carried something unbreakable. They stopped at a small diner on the edge of town. The smell of coffee filled the air and old songs played softly in the background. Lila hesitated before walking in, clutching her torn sweater. Alexander reassured her gently that it was okay and that no one would throw her out. They sat at a booth near the window. She looked down, nervous. When he asked what she wanted, she stared at the menu, unsure how to respond. She admitted she had never ordered food in a place like this before. He smiled faintly and suggested pancakes. Her eyes brightened for a moment. He ordered pancakes and hot chocolate for her, and coffee for himself. When the food came, she ate slowly at first, then faster, as if afraid it would disappear. He watched quietly, not with pity, but with humility. When she finished, she whispered a thank you and said she didn't know pancakes could taste that good. He nodded and said that people often forget how special simple things are. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm outside. Then she asked softly why he had been standing on that bridge. His hand tightened around his cup. He told her he had lost someone and then lost himself. She didn't ask for details, only nodded. She said she knew what that felt like, because when her mother died, she stopped talking for a year. A blind man once told her that as long as you can breathe, you can begin again. Alexander was quiet, moved by her words. He dropped her off later at a nearby shelter. Before she left, she thanked him for the food and for listening. As she walked away, he felt something stir inside, a question he hadn't asked in years. What was he really doing with his life? The next morning, he woke in his penthouse. For the first time in months, he ignored his business calls and stock updates. Instead, he drove back to the bridge. The fog was gone. The river looked calm. He stood there for a while, remembering her words. Start with helping someone else. Over the next few days, he visited the shelter again. Lila was there, sorting clothes for children, laughing softly. She looked up in surprise when she saw him. He told her he came to check on her. She smiled and said she was still alive. Soon, visiting the shelter became his daily habit. He brought food, clothes, and even volunteers to help repair the old building. People thought he was just another rich man trying to buy peace of mind. But over time, they saw he was different. He stayed late, listened to stories, and treated everyone with kindness. One afternoon, while painting the shelter walls, Lila asked why he was really doing all this. He paused and said, "Because you were right. I forgot what my miracle looked like." She smiled softly and asked if he had found it now. He looked at her and said, "I think I'm looking at it." For the first time in years, Alexander felt alive again, not because of success or money, but because of kindness, the kind that changes everything. For Alexander, something inside him began to heal. Each smile he saw, each hand he helped, filled the emptiness that money never could. He started funding scholarships for kids from the shelter, donating to hospitals, opening job centers. His name began appearing in the news again, but this time not as a billionaire, but as a man who changed. Still, he stayed humble. He told no one that a poor girl had saved him from the bridge. One night, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Lila said quietly, "You know, I used to believe people like you didn't care about people like me." He looked at her, thoughtful. "Maybe I didn't, until you made me see." She smiled, her eyes glimmering in the orange light. "Then maybe that was my miracle too." Alexander stared at her for a long time, realizing the truth. This girl, who had nothing, had given him everything. As darkness settled around them, he made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't let her disappear back into the streets. He didn't know how or when, but he knew one thing for sure. He owed her more than he could ever repay. And soon that promise would lead to a decision that would shock the world. A decision that would change both of their lives forever. The morning sun rose over the city skyline, spilling gold across the glass towers. Alexander Reed stood before the mirror, straightening his tie. But this time he wasn't getting ready for a corporate meeting. He was heading somewhere that mattered far more. The shelter was buzzing with excitement. Volunteers were setting up decorations. Children ran around with balloons, and the smell of freshly baked bread filled the air. Lila was there too, in her usual worn clothes, trying to fix a banner that kept falling from the wall. When she saw Alexander walk in, the chatter seemed to fade. He wasn't in his expensive suit today, just a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, a small smile on his face. "You're early," she said, brushing paint off her hands. He smiled. "Couldn't sleep." She laughed softly. "You, the great Mr. Reed, losing sleep? That's new." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around. At the walls they had painted together, the children she had cared for, the warmth that filled the room. It wasn't just a shelter anymore, it was a home. "Lila," he said quietly, "can I show you something?" She frowned but nodded. He led her outside where a large black car waited. Confused, she followed as he opened the door for her. They drove through the city until they reached an unfamiliar part of town, a quiet area surrounded by trees and sunlight. At the end of the street stood a brand new building with a silver plaque that read, "The Haven Foundation, for those who need a second chance." Lila's eyes widened. "What is this place?" He turned toward her, voice soft. "You once told me you wished people like me cared about people like you. So, I decided to start." Her mouth fell open slightly. "You built this?" He nodded. "Not just me, you inspired it. The foundation will fund education, shelter, and jobs for anyone who's lost their way. The way I once did." Tears welled up in her eyes. "You did all this because of me?" He smiled faintly. "Because of what you said on that bridge. You reminded me that life doesn't end when we fall. It begins when someone helps us stand again." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the weight of everything unsaid. Finally, Lila whispered, "You really changed, didn't you?" He chuckled. "No. You just helped me remember who I used to be before the world made me forget." She stepped closer, her eyes glistening. "You saved so many lives, Alex. But don't forget, someone saved yours too." He nodded, his voice breaking slightly. "And I'll never forget her." Inside the foundation's lobby, the first thing visitors would see was a framed photograph of a bridge at sunset. The very bridge where their story began. Beneath it, an engraved quote read, "One kind word can rewrite a life." Years passed. The foundation grew beyond anything they imagined. Branches opened across the country, helping thousands of people rebuild their lives. Alexander became a symbol of second chances, not as a billionaire, but as a man who dared to start again. But through all the success, one thing never changed: his bond with Lila. She refused to take credit, always saying, "It was your heart that changed, not me." But Alexander knew better. She had been the light in his darkness, the voice that pulled him back from the edge. One evening after a charity event, The two of them walked by that same old bridge. The water below shimmered under the moonlight. "Funny," Lila said softly. "If someone told me years ago that this bridge would become a part of our story, I'd have laughed." He smiled. "And yet it's where everything started." She looked at him, her expression tender. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been there that night?" He took a deep breath. "Then the world would have lost its best miracle." Her cheeks flushed and she shook her head. "You still talk like a man who writes novels instead of running empires." He grinned. "Maybe because you taught me that stories matter more than empires." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the soft hum of the city. Then Alexander said something he had wanted to say for years. "Lila, when I was standing here that night, I thought my life was over. You said one sentence, just one, and it changed everything. Do you remember?" She smiled faintly. "I told you that the sun still rises even after the darkest night." He nodded slowly. "And you were right." Then gently he took her hand. "The sun rose that day because of you." Her eyes softened, and before she could respond, he added quietly, "I don't want to lose that light again." Tears glimmered in her eyes. "You won't," she whispered. As they stood there, hand in hand, the first rays of dawn began to break across the horizon, just like that night years ago. But this time, they were both on the same side of hope. From that day forward, they worked together as equals, building, healing, and reminding others that one act of kindness can save a life, even if it seems too small to matter. And every time someone walked into the Haven Foundation and read the quote by the bridge photograph, they'd pause, wondering about the story behind it. Few knew the truth. That once a billionaire stood on a bridge ready to end it all, until a poor girl with nothing but words reminded him of the beauty of being alive. It wasn't just a story of wealth or pain. It was a story of seeing, not with the eyes, but with the heart. And for Alexander and Lila, that moment on the bridge became something eternal. Not the end of a life, but the beginning of two new ones. The end.